We are honored to present our first panel featuring Dr. Carol Swain, Mr. Bob Woodson, and our moderator, Dr. Matthew Spalding, discussing the truth of America's founding and how critical race theory is tearing America apart. Let's welcome our panel to the stage.
I pledge allegiance to this flag, and if that bothers you, well, that's too bad. But if you got pride and you're proud you do, hey, we could use some more like me and you. Where the stars and stripes and the eagle fly.
No, you're in the middle.
Okay.
Just briefly.
So our moderator, and then he will introduce our panelists. Dr. Matthew Spalding is Vice President of Washington Operations and Dean of the Van Andel Graduate School of Government for Hillsdale College in Washington, D.C., where he oversees the operations of the Kirby Center. Dr. Spalding served as Executive Director of President Trump's Advisory 1776 Commission, and we are very proud and honored that he is a member of Steamboat Institute's Board of Directors. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Spalding to introduce our panelists.
Well, great. Thank you all for being here. I am, as Jennifer mentioned, very proud to be on the board of trustees of the Steamboat Institute. I've been associated with them from almost the very beginning. It's a great organization. And on behalf of the board of trustees, I thank you all for your generous support and ask for more. I can say that. And as you mentioned, I'm also vice president of an obscure little college in southern Michigan. You might have heard of it. Undisclosed site. But I'm actually at the Autonomous Zone in Washington, D.C., where I oversee the campus there and run the graduate school in Washington, D.C. I've studied the American founding professionally as a student, taught it, written about it all of my life. But I must say that something different seems to be going on. Things have changed. It used to be a debate about history, and there are always debates about history. But history, you're pursuing the truth. But something different seems to have happened in that discussion. I learned that, not that I didn't know it before, but I learned it most directly through the 1776 Commission, or my experience, shall I say, in the 1776 Commission. In December of last year, I took leave from Hillsdale College to go over and be executive director, and in 5 weeks, which is a bureaucratic miracle given the federal government, in 5 weeks, we actually produced the 1776 report. You might have read it. Don't take the New York Times. Read it yourself. That experience and going through that was an eye-opener. There's nothing in that report that a few years ago would have been at all controversial. It talks about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the principles of those, and threats to them. The first and foremost being the slavery at the time of the founding and the rise of a pro-slavery argument from people like John C. Calhoun. It discussed slavery forthrightly and condemned it. Our guide in the report, kind of our version of Virgil, if you're thinking of Dante, our guide was Abraham Lincoln, and we used a lot of Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King. We released that report 2 days before the inauguration of the new president on Martin Luther King Day. The New York Times immediately said it was a racist document, and unbeknownst to me at least, literally down the hall from where we were writing the 1776 report, the Biden transition folks were writing executive orders to overturn previous executive orders, one of which was against something called critical race theory in the Trump administration, and the other one was to abolish the 1776 Commission, which was abolished within hours of the new president's inauguration. So I had the dubious honor, which I now consider to be an honor, of being hired by one president and fired 5 weeks later by another president. To talk about this in a deeper and better and broader view, we have two great people who I am very happy to say are great and dear friends of mine. And they have combined knowledge and experience we're going to learn a lot from. today, and I encourage all of you to listen and read and buy their books. Carol Swain is a recovering professor of political science and law at Vanderbilt University, but she is a public speaker and commentator. You might see her. She's very popular on Fox, especially Fox and Friends, and she's the author of several books, including her most recent, Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House, which, at least at this point, because it's not been banned yet, is a bestseller on Amazon.com. She is also, when I went over to the White House to do the 1776 Commission, I had a few requirements. One is that I would not have to do it with the Department of Education, but would do it in a little hideaway office. And the other was the people would be involved in the commission, and one of those was Carol Swain, and she was the vice chair of the President's 1776 Commission. The other guest is a very dear friend of mine who I've known for, I think, going on 25 years or so now. He describes himself as a community activist, but that's not actually what he is. I think, I was trying to come up with the best term. He's a combination of a preacher and a prophet of social revitalization and upward mobility. He established something 40 years ago because he was frustrated with the bureaucratic approach to solving poverty, and he founded the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, which was later renamed aptly the Woodson Center. And he not only preaches the gospel, but goes into neighborhoods and talks to those who, as he likes to say, are in poverty but not of poverty, about how to save themselves, and in doing so, help save their communities and our country. He was the founder of 1776 Unites, which we can talk about as well and hear more about that, and he's the author of several books, including most recently, Red, White, and Black, Rescuing American History from Revisionists and Race Hustlers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol first, and then Bob to say a few things. I've got some questions as well, but I know I'll be getting those from you on my magical little electronic pad here, so please send those in. Carol, welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And thank you all so much for caring enough to be here and contributing and, putting your money where your heart is, and also for the young people who see what's happening in America. They've not been indoctrinated to the point that they have given up on our nation. They haven't given up on us, even though we've made a mess of things. My focus will be critical race theory, and it's something that has been around for a while. The book that is newly published was written for the American people. So it's a book that's understandable for lay people, and it explains what critical race theory is, where it came from, why it's un-American, and how it runs counter to our Constitution and our civil rights laws. And I'm pleased to report that there are 2 chapters on how to fight back. There's a glossary, because we know that often people who are engaged in CRT, as soon as you challenge them, they immediately say, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing DEI. No, I'm not doing critical race theory. I'm doing culturally sensitive learning. No, I'm doing educational equity. No, I'm doing social justice. And so you really have to understand critical race theory well enough to push back. And the book that was written and published since the leadership conference for the Rockies that I was at a couple of months ago, it's co-authored with a young man from Georgetown, a young Ph.D. Marine, Ph.D. in political science, who discovered me through my research. He's a Christian, and of course he's unemployed. He's looking for a job as a professor, so if any of you have contacts somewhere where they might hire a brilliant Christian Marine political scientists, Chris Shore is your man. And did I say he was white? So he's going to need a lot of help getting a job, and so I want to get that out. And I also, yeah, he needs some reverse affirmative action. But one of the things that I want to say is that I feel very much called to be a civil rights activist for all people, because critical race theory has become the civil rights issue of our time. Mm-hmm. And I believe that there's no more important issue because it is affecting every sector of our society. And many white people seem to have lost their voices on this issue. And this is not the time to shrink back and worry about whether you're going to be called a racist, because the future for your children and your grandchildren, and also for racial and ethnic minorities, it's all at stake. And critical race theory, it's a racist ideology. It's really a white supremacist argument because it argues that white people, they're born with a property, investment in their skin color, and that the only way that they can rid themselves of the great evil that they have created throughout the world is to divest themselves of their whiteness. Can you imagine if you told black people or Hispanic people that they need to divest themselves of their race or their skin color? I mean, that would be considered so repugnant, but somehow it's okay to say that to white people. And white people, they have been put in the class of oppressors. You're all oppressors. It doesn't matter if you were born in Appalachia, you're a descendant of abolitionists, your families, your ancestors, they risked their lives setting up the Underground Railroad. It doesn't matter. You have white skin, so you're guilty. You're blood guilty. And for minorities, it doesn't matter if you're the son of a millionaire or a billionaire, you're considered a victim. And we're told through critical race theory that racism is permanent. And if it's permanent, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. And so it's very destructive, and they've given up on colorblindness, assimilation, and equal opportunity. They say they want equity, and it results in a lowering of standards. And there's no better illustration than to look at the minorities that are in place in the Biden administration. They have lowered standards, and it's a disgrace. These are not people that took advantage of equal opportunity. These are people that were put in place, for the most part, because of the color of their skin. And when you do that, it hurts everyone, and it hurts minorities the most. And so when advanced placement courses are gotten rid of because there are not enough people of color in those classes, when they say that math is racist and science is racist, and so racial and ethnic minorities need to be taught differently, that's the worst kind of racism. And when you look at the progressives, they were the ones that championed segregation, and they championed segregation. They are resegregating our society right now, our colleges, our universities, and this poison is in K through 12. It has Marxist roots. We are focused on critical race theory. That's only one critical theory. There's critical queer theory, critical feminist theory, there's critical, there are all kinds of critical theories. And I'm even going to say that right now we have critical medical or critical science theory that's dividing people between vaccinated and unvaccinated. It shames people, it bullies people, and it's un-American, and so we need to stand up. And so that's part of my message, and each of you can play a role. I am working with some people. One of the things that I started last fall was a company called Unity Training Solutions to provide an alternative to DEI. And some of the people that I'm working with are people that, they are recognizing they have power. You have power. If you sit on a board and you're given a significant amount of money to a school or some other institution, or you are part of a corporation, you can threaten to pull back your resources and people will listen. And so I am here to empower you, white people. I'm here to give you back your voice. And also to racial and ethnic minorities in the room, we have a responsibility. We need to lock arms with our white brothers and sisters the same way they locked arms with us during the Civil Rights Movement. Thank you.
Bob?
Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to return. I have a response for critical race theory. First of all, my message to all you white people who are self-flagellating, guilty white people, I want you to know that we have replaced CRT with CRE. I am a self-certified critical race exorcist. So, 2 waves of my hand, you absolved from racism and discrimination for a year, and I'm thinking about getting in on the race hustle and charging you $50 each. But it only lasts 2 years, and it doesn't extend to your children. So expect me to come back later with that one. All right?
That your children have to go to Hillsdale.
Yeah, that's right. But I really think we have to invoke humor in projecting, not take it so seriously. But what attracted me to the conservative movement back in the 70s when I was with the Urban League, when I got mugged by reality and moved to the right, it was the willingness of conservatives to engage in what Dr. King said, self-examination and being self-critical. They're willing to debate. I remember when Paul Weyrich, who was head of the Heritage Foundation at the time, challenged John Tower, was the, I think, Senator Tower from Texas.
Yeah.
And he was being nominated by the president to be the Secretary of Defense. And he had some moral failings. And Paul Weyrich stood up and testified against him, which provoked anger and rancor within the ranks of the conservative movement, because I admired the fact that this man put the pursuit of truth above the pursuit of politics, and the fact that he paid a price for it. But it impressed me that the conservative movement were a group of people who were ready to defend truth even at their political expense. But also, in that spirit of self-examination and self-criticism, I just think that it's important for us to, as conservatives, to re-examine ourselves as to what contribution we have made to the mess that we're in now. Because one of my grassroots said, if you want to go someplace you haven't been, you got to be willing to do something you haven't done. Mm-hmm. And if you keep doing what you do, you keep getting what you got. That's what my grassroots folks said. And so I just think it's time for some self-examination. The problems that we're facing today, ladies and gentlemen, is not just limited government, lower taxes, and stronger defense. The reality, ours is a cultural battle today. And therefore, we must employ cultural defense of that. The very fact that Samuel Adams wrote in 1779 that a general dissolution of principles and manners will more surely overthrow the liberties of America than the whole force of a common enemy. While the people are virtuous, they cannot be subdued, but when they lose their virtue, they will be ready to surrender their liberties to the first external and internal invader. For if virtue and knowledge are diffused among the people, they'll never be enslaved, and this will be their security. In other words, democracy and capitalism are but empty vessels into which we pour our values as a nation. And so that's why when in 1994, when the Congress, when the conservatives took over the Congress, and there was a big celebration, George Will, Grover Norquist, all of the luminaries in the conservative movement was in the room, and I asked a question that provoked silence. I said, tell me what a conservative victory means for the least of God's children. Mm-hmm. and there was silence. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a question we have got to answer. The question is not a race crisis we have a grace crisis. And therefore, we must confront it. And Michael Joyce, head of the, made a statement that echoed what Samuel Adams said when he said, and let me quote this, he said that, this was on January 26, 1996, "We must be honest with our own shortcomings in political discourse. When we focus exclusively on shrinking the federal government, it would be, and the cost, because the cost is too high, and focus on balancing the budget. As critical as these are, we begin to sound like crabby, small-souled bookkeepers. We play right into the hands of liberal caricatures of us as heartless, uncaring conservatives. When we put on our green eye shades, it enables liberals to put on their armor of righteousness." Ladies and gentlemen, we have got to recognize, that's why what Carol and I did is fighting back against this assault on the culture. What the left has done is using the rich legacy of the civil rights movement and the crucifixion of slavery and America's birth defect of slavery as a bludgeon against this country to define us as forever and incurably racist. And so Carol and I and others have decided, since they were using and abusing that and using blacks as a messenger, that our response, the messengers in response, have to be black. And that's why we organized 1776 Unites. And we challenged the fundamental premise of their argument against the country, that somehow the challenges of out-of-wedlock birth and violence and the disorganization you see in the urban centers is a legacy of slavery and discrimination. And therefore, the only solution is for whites to be condemned for racist and whites and blacks as victims. And so we challenged it not to debate them, but offer an alternative narrative. And so in our essays in this book, we challenge the fundamental false statement that somehow our condition was dependent upon slavery. So we went back and looked at how blacks responded in slavery. And we found that when whites were at their worst, we were at their best. We looked at the records of 6 plantations at the end of slavery to find out what was the state of the family. 75% of those slave families had a man and a woman raising children. And the nuclear family continued for 100 years, up until 1965, 85%. When we were denied access to hotels, we built our own in every major city. When racism was enshrined in law between 1920 and 1940, Julius Rosenwald partnered with Booker T. Washington. They built 5,000 low-income schools where Julius Rosenwald put up $4 million and the black community raised $6 million, and we closed the education gap between 1920 and 1940 from 3 years to 6 months. We did this because of the values of our founders. And so what we are doing we're saying to the left that the fundamental challenge that we're facing today is not race, it is upward mobility for those at the bottom. So we have more of a class problem than we have a race problem. But we must remove race as a barrier because it's preventing us from addressing the fundamental crisis in America. It is a moral and spiritual freefall that is consuming our children of all races and classes. Appalachian whites are dying of record numbers of prescription drugs. Homicide is the leading cause of deaths in the inner cities. Among Silicon Valley, among affluent white and Asian families, the suicide rate among teens is 6 times the national average. So what we're doing at the Woodson Center is we have to deracialize race and desegregate poverty so that we can come together. We are bringing together low-income whites, blacks, and so we can sit together to find out how do we heal the hole that is in the hearts of our young people that's causing them to diminish the value of their lives to the point where they're willing to take their own or take others. And so it is important for us to eliminate race as a barrier for us coming together as Americans. And so we're offering examples of how we have achieved against the odd, how the fundamental values of family, self-determination are critical to our uplift. We have a grace problem, not a race problem. And we'll talk about that a little bit.
Thank you.
Can I hear an amen? Amen. I told you. Great. Well, I've got some questions here, and I want to go to those, but I want to start a little more generally here. Carol talked about how this is the civil rights issue of our day, and I know Bob has talked about the civil rights, including his own involvement. There's a divide between what we understood as civil rights, the civil rights movement. I think one of the things that upset people most is when we made references to Martin Luther King, but they've now rejected Martin Luther King and the modern civil rights movement.
Well, he's been
how did this happen? How does this? What happened?
He was canceled because they want people judged by the color of their skin and not the content of their character. And so there's no use, they have no use for a Dr. Martin Luther King because it doesn't fit their agenda. And I also want to say that this agenda that's being put forth is not for the benefit of racial and ethnic minorities, it's for the benefit of white progressives, and their end goal is Marxism and to bring down the United States, and they will use whatever they can, whether it's dividing heterosexuals and homosexuals, males and females, whites and racial and ethnic minorities, vaccinated or unvaccinated. It's all about conflict theory. It will never bring about racial reconciliation. Anyone who tells you that racial reconciliation will come out of critical race theory is lying to you.
But what we must do, I think, to combat it on our side is we cannot confront it by just an argument. That I believe that experience will always trump an argument, and that a witness is more powerful than an advocate. And so what we're doing is confronting their argument with examples. For instance, they're saying that racism is responsible for the disparity. So we go back in history, one quick example. In 1943, there were no blacks as naval officers. It was prohibited by law. So Eleanor Roosevelt forced the Navy to train 13 black college graduates to be naval officers. So the Navy said, well, we're going to give these black candidates in 8 weeks what we give white cadets in 16 weeks. So when they found out, they covered their windows in their barracks and studied all night, and when they were tested, they scored in the 90th percentile. And so the Navy said, well, they cheated, so they tested them individually. They scored in the 93rd percentile. That record exists today as the highest. So it is important for us to present examples to contest their proposition that it is the discrimination that is the barrier. And we give endless examples of that. But also the voices of opposition have to come from the people that they say they are advocating for.
So Bob, may I present
Carol's got her hand up.
may I present myself as an exhibit?
Exactly, right.
I was born in 1954. I don't mind telling my age. And that was the year of the Brown versus Board of School of Education desegregation case. And those who are familiar, the Supreme Court ruled that schools should be desegregated in all deliberate speed. And I was born and raised in Virginia. For Virginia, that meant the late 1960s. So I was born into a system of systemic racism. And I watched that system collapse. I watched the passage of 3 major civil rights acts.
Right.
I watched opportunities open up for people like me. And as a consequence, I, a person who was one of 12 children, born and raised in rural poverty to parents who were not college educated, dropped out of school after finishing the 8th grade, married at 16. By the time I was 21, I had 3 small children. I got a high school equivalency, went to a community college, got the first of 5 college and university degrees. People came into my life and steered me into academia. I ended up at Princeton. I got early tenure. My first book was cited by the U.S. Supreme Court, cited in many lower court decisions. I have lived the American dream, and I never saw myself as a victim because I came from poverty, or because I was a woman, or because of whatever you want to put in there. I'm black. No, I never saw myself as a victim. I loved America. I believed that if I worked hard, I could overcome the circumstances of my birth. I had plenty of role models, and they didn't look like me.
So you both made, those are great points, but it strikes me that one clear distinction here is one was called the Civil Rights Movement, and the other one is called critical race theory.
Right.
Which is it just tells you right there, this is a abstraction
Right.
invented in an academic, hellhole, I would say, for a purpose, to put something onto the country as opposed to coming up from the country to
Right.
Right or wrong.
Right.
Is that a fair? These are just completely different things.
And you know something, education is wonderful. But I can tell you that as a retired university professor, I see how destructive academia is. When you have an industry where people get paid to come up with bizarre ideas, they have so much time on their hands, and when those ideas seep down to the rest of the society, we are in trouble. And so some of the worst ideas in history came from the academy.
Let me just
Amen.
Let's say, in terms of solutions, I want to talk about what should we do at this point. It seems to me that the elites on both sides are controlling this agenda.
Right.
Over the past, 40 years, I've served low-income people. As I said, the problem in America is not racial, it's upward mobility for all low-income people. That's why we emphasize class over race. And we're bringing low-income people to speak for them. But the way you undermine the moral authority of the so-called social justice warriors is provide the means for the people in whose name they say they are promoting these policies to speak for themselves. The reality is 80% of Black American surveys do not support defund the police. 60% surveyed do not believe racial discrimination is a principal barrier for them having a productive life. But they are not, so we've brought together 2,500 low-income Black mothers who lost children to urban violence, and they took out a full-page ad saying we support the police and that Black Lives Matter is profiting off of the blood of Black children. And so we have got to allow, they are the salvation of this country. The sleeping giants are those low-income Black people in those communities. You do not see Black Lives Matter flags in low-income Blacks, only on white liberal churches.
As one of my professors like to say, you can't beat an old dogma with a new stigma. Some new academic theory is not going to solve our problem. We need another movement, a civil rights movement.
And
in the true sense, that it comes up from below.
But I mean, it's all about values and principles. And if you're willing to stand on values and principles, we will win. And I want to briefly go down one of the chapters in my book, the last chapter. We have 10 proposals for resisting and ultimately defeating CRT. First, you have to know what it is and where it came from and how it impacts our society. But then you have to challenge the legality and constitutionality of it. That is the strongest grounds, I think, that we can defeat critical race theory, critical feminist theory, critical queer theory, that there are rights and there are civil rights that people have that they can stand on. And for many people, I hate to keep, talking about white people, black people. A lot of white people have not thought of themselves as having civil rights, but you are protected by civil rights laws. And for minorities, we are very attuned. We're looking for discrimination. And so you have to document and begin to think in terms of building cases and filing lawsuits. And some have successfully been filed. And you need to do what many of you are doing, what you're doing now, organizing the grassroots movements, electing the school boards members, city council, mayors, challenging, the 1619 curriculum as 1776 Unites and other groups are doing. You have to build coalitions that go across the partisan lines, because this is an American problem. This is not conservatives versus liberals, Democrats versus Republicans. This affects all of us. Use multiple strategies, educate church leaders. The church is just totally missing in action. And they have been persuaded that somehow social justice that comes from Marxism is the same as biblical justice. I think you're going to have to brush up on that. We have a chapter on it, and educate your pastors. Continue to pressure the corporations, stand up to big tech, monitor state and local agencies to make sure that they are not supporting racist, discriminatory CRT or discrimination against males, and develop alternatives. And so these are things that are fleshed out in this book, but this is how we're going to defeat CRT. And if I had to pick one that I thought was the most important of all, it would be challenging the legality and constitutionality of CRT.
But let me just add, I define my political philosophy as radical pragmatism. I am a cardiac Christian who is a radical pragmatist. I just want what works. And the way we are going to, another part of our strategy has to hold up examples of it. And as I said, a witness is more powerful than an advocate. When the servants of John the Baptist came to Jesus and said, "Are you the one, or shall we seek another?" He didn't respond by saying, "Wasn't I born on Christmas?" He healed in their presence and told them to go tell them what you saw. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we must do. We must be willing to go out and find the Carl Swains who came from dirt poverty and excelled in this system. In our book, we have examples of 20 blacks who were born slaves who died millionaires. And they practiced radical grace. And that is Robert Smalls, who was born in Sumter, South Carolina, was on a Southern supply ship. He commandeered it with 6 of his other slave crew, picked up their families and turned it over to the Union Navy. He became celebrated. The Congress gave him $1,500. After the war, he became a successful businessman, got elected to Congress, went back and purchased a plantation on which he was a slave. And because of the family had become destitute, he took them in, and the mother was delusional, and he let her stay in her own bedroom. There's an example of radical grace. If Robert Small could respond to his slave master with grace and redemption, how can somebody with a black with a Ph.D. make 6 figures with a Harvard degree be pissed off at anything? Excuse the language, but I think you'll know what I mean. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have to roll up our sleeves and celebrate people who embody the values we say we believe. At every conservative conference, we need to go out and find the Carl Swains who are in there. Young people. We have an 18-year-old boy, a black boy, homeless, who bicycled 6 hours in August across Georgia to return to school. 2 white police officers found him found out what he was, put him up in a motel, got him a job washing dishes at a pizzeria. They put him on, they raised about $1,000 in 3 days, and he's put it in a savings account. There are endless examples of a homeless mother of 2 black children and sleeping in a car for 3 years and sleeping in a homeless shelter, studying by the light of the cell phone. They started college. That one of them graduated,
Magna cum laude?
No, from, anyway, they graduated with honors from high school. And what is it? Valedictorian and salutatorian. And they started Spelman College as sophomores because they took so many advanced placement classes. Ladies and gentlemen, these are examples of grace in action. They ought to be celebrated as people who have overcome great difficulties. They should be on every conservative banquet to come and speak. Our scholars should be studying people like this. We should be going out looking for people who have achieved against the odds based upon the embrace and implementation of the values of our founders. And conservatives can join in common community, and then we will come together and develop a winning coalition. It won't be done by just complaining about what they're doing.
Right.
Celebrate what we are doing as Americans.
Right.
So there are several questions here that deal with a lot of this debate is occurring in, it's occurring in different places. There's an academic component, meaning higher education, which tends to be kind of muddled intellectual nonsense. But then there's a lot of things going on in K through 12, especially when it comes to curriculum and fights at school boards.
Right.
And then there are other questions about how do you talk about this with your friends? I mean, this is going on all over the place. What kind of advice would you pick of particular areas in terms of, actually, how do these people help with these practical things that are going on everywhere?
I mean, there were so many parents that contacted me, and then you've read the stories on the Fox News websites about what is happening to our children. Even in K through 12, kids coming home crying, shamed because of their ancestors and the color of their skin. If you're a parent and that's happening to your child, it's happening to someone else's child in the same school. And so I strongly encourage parents to organize. You don't have to fight the battle by yourself. And for a while, it took people a long time to get started because they said, if I stand up, maybe they will retaliate against my child. Well, look at what they're already doing to our children. And CRT didn't just start with George Floyd's death. It's been around for a long time. It just became more aggressive, and so now more people are aware of it. Parents are pushing.
Just a quick foot on that. The other thing, this came up in several questions, and I've observed, is that this has been around for a while, but they keep changing the terms.
Right.
So when we're referring to critical race theory, that's a particular academic nonsensical argument that grows out of Marxist critical theory.
Right.
But they have broader terms, and then as soon as you complain against critical race, oh, we're not teaching that. We're merely teaching inclusion.
Well, here's the thing. They would say, we are teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there's nothing wrong with diversity for people that, believe in God or can see. This is a diverse universe. Diversity by itself, there's nothing wrong with diversity, but even with diversity, equity, and inclusion, they have changed the meaning of words. And every DEI officer that I have ever encountered, they are steeped in critical race theory. They are applying critical race theory. And so you need to know what it is. And they have abandoned the pursuit of equal opportunity and colorblindness and assimilation. And they openly, this guy, Ibram Kendi, he openly talks about discrimination, using discrimination, to pretty much level the playing field. And there was a time, when some of us, kind of wondered and joked about where all those ethnic studies majors were going to get jobs. Well, welcome, they're your DEI trainers, and they're making 6 figures, and they are imposing their views on the rest of society, and there's no certification. Anyone can hang out a shingle and say they're a diversity trainer, and you are allowing these people to disrupt corporations and institutions and churches. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me that in a nation as powerful as this nation, with well-educated people and so many lawyers, that you would allow something that is so clearly un-American, so clearly runs against our Constitution and our civil rights laws to stand. I don't understand it.
Well, one of the things that we did at the Woodson Center in this book, we've developed curriculum from K through 12, and we've released the first 5. We had 19,000 downloads in 3 weeks. 1619, Hannah Nicole Jones, they had 4,000 downloads in a year.
Right.
And we've also had webinars to school board people, parents, groups. So we really need to get the word out, and we're giving practical examples that people can use. But we've got to come together. People like Steve Shuck, my friend here of many years, has taken his foundation that he created and investing in these grassroots parents and low-income leaders who are on the firing line with Parents Challenge. You all should support those kind of initiatives. But we must come together across race lines and unite conservatives with grassroots Josephs, as I call them, and then we can stand together. But we've got to demonstrate to people by our example. Julius Rosenwald, wealthy CEO of Sears, came down and partnered with Booker T. Washington, and he put up $4 million. He wanted to build these schools in his plants, but Booker T. Washington said, back then, we don't want charity from you, we want investment. So he put up $4 million, and the black community raised $6 million on their own, selling dinners and lunches, and built 5,000 schools all over the South. And as a consequence, they were able to come together and reduce the gap. In 1930 to 1940, when racism was enshrined in law, the marriage rate in the black community was higher than any other group in society. And so we need to hold up these facts when people are talking about the impact of slavery and discrimination. So black America is not defined by oppression. It's defined by resilience, perseverance, and ability to achieve against the odds by really embracing these values of our founders. This is why people of color are risking their lives to get here, and it isn't to vote.
And there's something else, I think that, you know, a lot of us have been blessed. Okay, so this room is full of blessed folks. Whether you believe in God or not, you're blessed. Okay. What I think would be very useful for white people to learn how to do is what they are putting forth is very destructive to racial and ethnic minorities. If you tell them that math is racist and science is racist, and so minority students should be held to a lower standard, you are destroying opportunities for that whole generation. And so instead of just framing it around the discrimination and bullying and shaming of your own children, which is repugnant and unacceptable, focus on what it's doing to racial and ethnic minorities, because it's destroying opportunities. Like when I came through, I knew that I had to work hard. I had to meet certain standards. I wanted an equal opportunity, and so I knew I had to work hard. They're telling young people that it doesn't matter what you do, the society is systemically racist, everything is against you, and they're resegregating. You know, in violation of the Civil Rights Act, the resegregation started on college and university campuses. It's now taking place in K through 12. A resegregation that's totally against the law. And so if you are uncomfortable with framing it around what's happening to your child, or maybe you pulled your child out of public or private school and you're homeschooling them, probably the best school, in most cases it is the best school, you still have a stake in everyone else's child. And I think that you need to really challenge the leaders about what they are doing to racial and ethnic minorities, how they are destroying their opportunities.
Just one quick note, and that is, as a veteran of the civil rights movement, having led demonstrations in Westchester, Pennsylvania, that's the home of Barrett Rustin, I almost long for the old-fashioned bigot.
At least you know what they're doing and you could condemn them.
Because
Right.
it is external. There's even a level of respect. But what is worse than bigotry to me is moral treason, is when people come to you armed with the expectation that they are to help you when they do everything to destroy you. There are two ways of preventing people from competing. One is deny them by law, the way we used to do under segregation. The other, more fatal way, is to tell them they don't have to compete. Because of their history, they can just expect to receive, and so you're robbing them of the ability to have agency, to be agents of their own uplift. Nothing is more crippling, nothing is more treacherous than communicating to a people that their destiny and their future is defined by somebody who is your enemy.
Well, I can tell you that progressives, they've always believed that racial and ethnic minorities were inferior. And I can remember being in college, like, I never saw myself as handicapped or disadvantaged, and so I was just, just really, it took me when I got into graduate school and I started taking the courses, on oppression, that was where I learned that I was black, I'm poor, I'm a woman, and I could never do the things I had already done. And it was too late. It was too late. But imagine if I'd gotten that as an undergrad. And as an undergrad, like, I went to Roanoke College, Lutheran school, and I just happened to gravitate, I guess, towards professors that were more conservative, and they did not treat me in that way. They never treated me as if I was handicapped. And I am just so glad that I was not exposed to the kind of rhetoric that young people get today. It's very dangerous how they can destroy people. I'd like to believe that because of my personality, someone tells me I can't do something, I'm going to prove to them that I can, that I would have survived even if I had gotten the messages young people get today, but I'm not sure.
I just want to echo what Jason Riley said to white people: stop helping us.
Right, right. Which of course that's the message of Frederick Douglass before that. I want to point Carol made about how the origins of racism. I just want to remind everybody that the beginnings of progressivism, Woodrow Wilson, was really the origins of racism in many ways in the country, a scientific racism that caused a lot of problems. And one of the things we identified in the 1776 report, which upset a lot of people, was John C. Calhoun was the father of identity politics.
Right.
Because that argument, which is the pro-slavery argument, is the one that defined people. Their politics and their freedom would be determined by their race. Mm-hmm. And so the history of all this, including the history of the post-Civil War Democratic Party passing segregation laws, is something that history needs to be teaching. I should point out, 76 Unites is a great curriculum, but also after I was fired, one of the things we went back to Hillsdale, and we have some experience in teaching. We have issued a K through 12 curriculum free to any school that wants to use it.
And I'd like to point out that after Matt was fired, we reconstituted the 1776 Commission because we'd taken an oath of office before God to perform a certain function. And so, we were not dissolved by the stroke of a pen. As far as I know, we still exist.
It's a 2-year commission.
Right, okay.
And as we said, you can't erase our history. And the other thing we did right after that is we issued a book version of the 1776 report with footnotes, because one of the criticisms was it had no footnotes, therefore it's not serious.
This one has footnotes,
and
index.
so the 1776 report, we put in footnotes from a lot of mainstream historians to make our point. I want to close here by bringing us back to the connection back to the truths of the American founding, by pointing out and then getting your comments on the fact that every moral movement in America the civil rights movement, the anti-communist movement, the abolitionist movement, the early feminist movement. Every movement has begun with a claim and a reaching back to the truth that all men are created equal. That is, and is what Lincoln called, that's the moral truth at the center of who we are. So we need to unite what you're talking with to those truths, I think, to go forward. So last thoughts from both of you.
Yeah, I think that in our fight back, I really embrace Dr. King's approach of agape love. Dr. King said, when we are opposing our enemy, we should not seek their destruction, but seek their redemption, while at the same time protecting ourselves from the oppression. But the goal isn't to humiliate or destroy, but to redeem. And it is with that level of love that I think we need to be moving forward and be successful. But it ought to be done in a spirit of love. And that's why in our approach to 1776, we don't argue, we offer inspirational and aspirational examples. We even have some non-conservative as a part of us. The only qualification is you believe in the principles, virtues of our founders.
And I would say to everyone to be encouraged that it's not as bad as it looks. There are more of us than there are of them. And it seems like, there's more of them because they are strategically placed. But I think that we're going to win this battle with CRT. I think in the next year or two, we will see it collapse because it runs so counter to our civil rights laws and our Constitution. And so people should, it looks dark out there, and I would say that large parts of our government, it seems to have been taken over by radicals who don't love our nation, but the vast majority of Americans are good, decent people in both political parties,
Yes.
and I think we will prevail, so be encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank both of you. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.